My name is Emmett Carrington. I'm 33 years old, and for the last decade, I've been the backbone of my family's construction company, Carrington and Cobra Development, based in Denver, Colorado. I have a degree in civil engineering, but what really set me apart wasn't just the technical knowledge. It was my ability to turn complex contracts into profitable, sustainable operations. While I was negotiating with suppliers, resolving legal impasses and keeping projects on schedule and within budget, my older brother, Sawyer, 38, was living off appearances. He took international trips funded by our father's credit cards, attended high society events in Cherry Creek, and sold himself as the strong face of the brand, even though he hadn't set foot on a construction site in years. Behind the scenes at the company, I was the one leading. I managed the crews, handled the permits, dealt with the city inspectors, and made sure our contracts with the county didn't fall through because of bureaucratic nonsense. But publicly, Sawyer was treated like the face of Carrington and Co. Whenever anyone questioned his absence from the day-to-day operations, he'd use rehearsed lines about how delegating well is leading with vision. The truth was different. He was an empty symbol, kept in place by our father's emotional insistence on maintaining family unity. Our dad believed that the Carrington name meant something in Denver's construction world, and he wasn't wrong. We'd built residential communities, commercial plazas, and mixed-use developments across the Front Range, but the name only meant something because I made sure the work got done right. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The day of the will reading came 3 weeks after our father's funeral in early 2025. We gathered at a law office in downtown Boulder, in one of those old brick buildings with wooden floors that creak when you walk. Sawyer showed up wearing a tailored Navy suit, smiling with that smug superiority he'd perfected over the years. He already considered himself the heir to the house, the company, and the family legacy. While we waited in the conference room, he leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He gets Grandma's toys. I get the house and the company." The attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia Drummond, gave a polite, professional smile. She didn't correct him. Not yet. I stayed quiet. I'd learned a long time ago that silence is more powerful than defensiveness. Sawyer loved an audience, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Patricia opened the file in front of her and began reading the terms of the estate. The house in Cherry Creek, a colonial-style property with 5 bedrooms and a 2-car garage, went to Sawyer. He grinned. Then she continued. The company, Carrington and Co. Development, including all assets, contracts, intellectual property, and operational control, had been transferred entirely to me 5 years earlier, in 2020, not in the will, before the will, through a private legal restructuring that our father had executed with full legal counsel and notarized documentation. Sawyer's face went blank. He blinked twice, like he was trying to reboot. Then he stammered, "What do you mean 5 years ago?" Patricia pulled out a bound document and slid it across the table. It was a corporate transfer agreement, signed by our father, witnessed by 2 attorneys, and filed with the Colorado Secretary of State. The company had been mine, legally and entirely, since I was 28 years old. The reason was simple. Our father had recognized that Sawyer represented a financial and reputational risk. There were records, failed investments, personal debts, misuse of company funds for trips that had nothing to do with business development. Dad had quietly and methodically moved the company into my name to protect it from Sawyer's recklessness. And then there were Grandma's toys. Patricia explained that along with the company, I had inherited our grandmother's collection of Victorian automata and miniatures. These weren't toys in any conventional sense. They were mechanical figures, clockwork devices, and intricate scale models from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Our grandmother, Emmett Carrington, had been a collector and restorer. She'd kept the collection in a climate-controlled wing of the original family property in Littleton. a section of the house that Sawyer had never bothered to visit. He'd dismissed them his entire life as old junk and grandma's toys. But 6 months before our father passed, he'd had the collection appraised by a specialist from an auction house in New York. The total estimated value at auction was over $500,000. Some individual pieces were worth $20,000 to $30,000 each. The collection included a French singing bird automaton from 1870, a German mechanical theater with moving figures, and a set of English silver miniatures that had been featured in a museum exhibition in the 1920s. Sawyer stared at the appraisal document like it was written in a foreign language. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there, hands folded on the table, waiting for Patricia to finish. She continued. The house Sawyer inherited, the one he'd been so proud of, came with something he hadn't anticipated. 3 mortgages. Our father had refinanced the property twice in the last decade to cover Sawyer's spending and failed business ventures. The equity was nearly gone. The monthly payments on those loans totaled over $7,000, and with no steady income, no position at the company, and a reputation that was now in free fall, Sawyer was staring at a financial sinkhole. He tried to speak, his voice cracking slightly. This isn't right. He manipulated Dad. This is favoritism. Patricia didn't even blink. Your father executed these transfers with full mental capacity, in the presence of legal counsel, and with clear documentation of his reasoning. If you'd like to contest this, you're welcome to retain your own attorney. But I'll tell you now, the case is airtight. Sawyer looked at me. I met his eyes, calm and steady. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. The documents spoke for themselves. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Sawyer left without shaking anyone's hand. I stayed behind to review some additional paperwork with Patricia, including the formal transfer of certain intellectual property rights and client contracts that had been in a transitional holding pattern. Everything was clean, everything was legal, and everything had been planned years in advance. Over the next few weeks, the reality of the situation settled in. I officially assumed the presidency of Carrington & Co., a role I'd been performing in practice for years. I met with our accounting team, restructured some vendor agreements, and positioned the company for expansion into sustainable residential development, a market segment that was growing rapidly in Colorado. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn about my new title. I just did the work, the same way I always had. Sawyer, on the other hand, was drowning. The house in Cherry Creek became a burden. He couldn't afford the mortgage payments, the property taxes, or the maintenance on a 40-year-old home that needed a new roof and updated electrical systems. He tried to sell it, but the market was competitive, and with the debt load attached to the property, he couldn't find a buyer willing to take it on at a price that would clear his obligations. He also tried to salvage his reputation. He reached out to some of our father's old contacts, trying to position himself as a consultant or advisor. But word had spread. People in Denver's construction and development community talk. They knew he hadn't been involved in operations for years. They knew the company had been quietly transferred to me, and they knew why. One afternoon, about 2 months after the will reading, I ran into an old colleague of my father's at a coffee shop near Union Station. His name was Greg Hollister, a project manager who'd worked with us on a mixed-use development in Golden back in 2018. He shook my hand and said, "I heard about the transition. Good for you, Emmett. Your dad made the right call." I thanked him and kept it brief. I didn't need validation, but it was good to know that people who actually understood the industry recognized what had happened. Greg added, almost as an afterthought, "Sawyer tried to pitch me on some kind of partnership last week. I didn't even return his call." I nodded. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Sawyer was burning through his network and people were stepping back. That wasn't my doing. That was just the natural consequence of years of superficiality catching up with him. By late spring of 2025, Sawyer had started liquidating assets. He sold his Audi Q7, a 2021 model he used to drive to Aspen for weekend ski trips, for about $35,000. He sold some furniture, including a dining set our mother had given him years ago. He even put a few pieces of jewelry up for sale online. None of it was enough to cover the gap between what he owed and what he could realistically earn. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd reached out to a few banks about refinancing, but his credit history was a mess. He had late payments, maxed out credit cards, and a pattern of living beyond his means that no lender wanted to touch. The house that was supposed to be his crown jewel had become an anchor, dragging him down. Meanwhile, I focused on the company. We secured a contract with the city of Aurora for a new mixed-income housing development, a project worth $12 million over 3 years. It was exactly the kind of work our father had built the company's reputation on, and I made sure we delivered on every milestone. Our crews were efficient, our timelines were realistic, and our relationships with subcontractors were solid. We didn't overpromise, we just performed. I also took care of the collection. I moved the automata and miniatures to a secure storage facility in Denver, with proper climate control and insurance. I wasn't planning to sell them, at least not yet. They represented something more than money to me. They were a reminder of my grandmother, a woman who valued craftsmanship, patience, and attention to detail. She used to tell me when I was a kid that the best things in life were the ones that took time to build. She was right. Sawyer made one last attempt to challenge the estate distribution. He hired an attorney, a guy named Derek Pullman, who specialized in contested wills and estate disputes. They filed a motion claiming undue influence and lack of transparency in the corporate transfer. It went nowhere. Patricia had anticipated this exact scenario, and the documentation our father had prepared was ironclad. Every transfer had been recorded. Every decision had been witnessed. Every financial justification had been documented in writing, including detailed records of Sawyer's misuse of company funds and the liabilities he'd created. The motion was dismissed within 6 weeks. The judge didn't even schedule a hearing. She reviewed the evidence, noted that the transfers had occurred years before our father's death, and ruled that there was no basis for a challenge. Sawyer's attorney sent him a final bill for $9,000. He couldn't pay it in full. By the summer of 2025, the situation had reached a breaking point. Sawyer couldn't maintain the house, couldn't find steady work, and couldn't repair the damage to his reputation. He put the property up for a short sale, which meant accepting less than what he owed on the mortgages and negotiating with the banks to forgive the difference. It was a humiliating process, and it took months to finalize. In the end, he walked away with nothing, no equity, no profit. Just the relief of not being buried under debt anymore. He left Denver shortly after the sale closed in early September. I heard he moved to Phoenix, where he had a friend who worked in commercial real estate. I don't know if he found work there or if he's still struggling to rebuild. I don't keep tabs on him. We haven't spoken since the day of the will reading, and I have no intention of reaching out. There's nothing left to say. As for me, I kept moving forward. Carrington & Co. continued to grow. We expanded into green building certifications and energy-efficient design, markets that were increasingly important to buyers in Colorado. We hired 2 new project managers, both with strong backgrounds in sustainable construction, and we started bidding on contracts with municipalities that prioritized environmental impact. I didn't do this to prove anything to Sawyer. I did it because it was the right direction for the company, and because it honored the work my father had started. He'd built something real, something solid, and I wasn't going to let that fall apart just because one person in the family couldn't handle responsibility. The collection stayed in storage, carefully cataloged and insured. I visited it once every few months, just to check on the condition of the pieces and make sure everything was being maintained properly. One day I might donate some of the items to a museum or auction them for a charity that my grandmother would have supported. But there's no rush. Unlike Sawyer, I don't need the money. And unlike him, I understand that value isn't just about what something costs, it's about what it represents. There were moments when people asked me if I felt guilty about how things turned out. The answer is no. I didn't create Sawyer's problems. I didn't force him to spend money he didn't have or ignore the responsibilities that came with being part of a family business. I just did my job, consistently and competently, while he did nothing. The only thing I'm guilty of is being prepared when the truth finally came out. Our father saw what was happening years before the rest of us did. He saw that Sawyer was a liability, not an asset. He saw that the company needed protection, not just from external risks, but from internal ones too. And he made the decision to transfer everything to the person who had actually earned it. That wasn't favoritism. That was pragmatism. I think about that sometimes when I'm reviewing contracts or walking through a job site. My father trusted me with something he'd spent his entire life building, and I've honored that trust every single day since. That's not revenge. That's responsibility. And in the end, responsibility is what separates people who build legacies from people who just inherit names. The months continued forward throughout 2025. Carrington and Co. secured more contracts, including a partnership with a nonprofit focused on affordable housing in underserved communities across the Denver metro area. It was challenging work, with tight budgets and even tighter timelines, but it was also the most fulfilling project I'd ever been part of. We weren't just building structures, we were creating opportunities for families who'd been priced out of the housing market. I promoted one of our senior project managers, a woman named Rachel Ortiz, to Vice President of Operations. She'd been with the company for 8 years and had proven herself time and again. She understood the business, respected the crews, and had a knack for solving problems before they became crises. Bringing her into leadership wasn't just good for the company. It sent a message that merit mattered more than nepotism or name recognition. Every now and then, someone would ask me about Sawyer. Usually it was an old client or a vendor who remembered him from the days when he'd show up at company events wearing expensive suits and shaking hands. I kept my answers simple and neutral. He's pursuing other opportunities, I'd say, or he's no longer with the company. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the real story, and the people who didn't weren't worth explaining it to. One afternoon in late September, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Sawyer. No return address, just a Phoenix postmark. I almost didn't open it. I stood in my kitchen holding the envelope, wondering if there was any point in reading whatever he had to say. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short. 4 sentences. You won. I get it now. Dad knew what he was doing. Take care of the company. No apology, no bitterness, just acknowledgement. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and filed it away in a drawer. I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. He'd finally understood what I'd known all along, and that was enough. Life continued. I bought a house in the Highlands neighborhood, a renovated bungalow with original hardwood floors and a small backyard. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned through years of hard work. I didn't need a mansion in Cherry Creek to prove anything. I needed a place that felt like home. I also started dating again. Her name was Lauren, a landscape architect I met through a mutual friend at a charity fundraiser for Habitat for Humanity in 2024. She was smart, grounded, and completely unimpressed by titles or family names. We talked about design, sustainability, and the challenges of working in industries where people often valued appearance over substance. She got it. She got me. The company kept growing. We hit $20 million in annual revenue, then 25. We hired more staff, opened a satellite office in Colorado Springs, and started getting inquiries from developers in Wyoming and New Mexico. I didn't chase growth for the sake of growth. I chased quality, sustainability, and projects that aligned with our values. The growth followed naturally. I also made a decision about the collection. I reached out to the Denver Art Museum and arranged to loan several pieces for an exhibition on Victorian craftsmanship and mechanical art. The exhibit ran for 6 months and drew significant attention from collectors and historians. My grandmother's name was listed in the exhibition credits, along with a brief note about her dedication to preserving these pieces. It felt right. She would have been proud. Some of the pieces I kept. The French singing bird automaton in particular held a special place for me. I had it restored by a specialist in Boston and displayed it in my home office, where I could see it every day. It was a reminder of patience, precision, and the value of things that endure. Looking back, I don't think of what happened as revenge. Revenge implies that I took action to hurt Sawyer or bring him down. I didn't. I just continued doing what I'd always done, which was my job. The difference was that eventually, the truth caught up with the illusion. Sawyer spent years living off a reputation he didn't earn, and when that reputation collapsed, he had nothing left to stand on. My father understood that. He knew that appearances only last as long as people are willing to believe them, and he wasn't willing to risk the company's future on someone who couldn't back up the facade. So he made a choice, quietly and deliberately, to protect what he'd built by putting it in the hands of someone who could actually sustain it. I've carried that responsibility with the seriousness it deserves. I haven't taken shortcuts. I haven't exploited the company for personal gain. I've simply led it the way it was meant to be led, with integrity, competence, and a long-term vision. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation or public vindication, is the real victory. Sawyer thought he was entitled to everything because of his name and his position as the older brother. But entitlement doesn't build companies. Work does. Consistency does. Showing up every day and making decisions that prioritize the long-term health of the business over short-term ego gratification, that's what builds something lasting. The greatest satisfaction I've felt through all of this isn't that Sawyer lost. It's that I proved with documentation, results, and years of steady performance that the legacy was always in the right hands, even when no one wanted to see it. Even when people assumed that the older brother, the one with the charm and the connections, was the natural heir. I didn't need to tear him down. I just needed to keep building. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.